my pleasure to introduce Dr. Kai and Charles Poeppelman, who will be discussing brain-computer interface in patients with ALS. Daniel Kai is an assistant professor in the Department of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation and the Department of Neurology at UT Southwestern Medical Center. He specializes in electrodiagnosis and neuromuscular medicine. Dr. Kai earned his medical degree at UT Southwestern Medical School, where he also completed a residency in physical medicine and rehabilitation. He received advanced training through a fellowship in neuromuscular medicine at the University of Washington Medical Center in Seattle. Board certified by American Board of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation, Dr. Kai joined the UT Southwestern faculty in 2021. Dr. Kai serves as a resident and fellowship liaison on the board of the American Association of Neuromuscular and Electrodiagnostic Medicine and is a member of the American Academy of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation. Our second speaker, Charles Poeppelman, is a speech-language pathologist working to bring brain-computer interfaces to market approval for patients living with ALS. He works for a company called Synchron, a neurotechnology developer that has already completed 2 clinical trials with PALS and is moving towards their 3rd clinical trial later this year. Charles previously worked across the US and Canada for Tobii Dynavox, where he served in various roles involving clinical and patient training on assistive technologies, as well as product and market access approvals for complex access systems and speech-generating devices. Thank you, Dr. Kai and Charles Poeppelman, for being here today, and I will now turn the time over to you.
All right, perfect. Thanks for the introduction, Sarah. I appreciate it. Okay, let me try to share my screen. All right, can you guys see my presentation now?
It is not in presentation mode, but we can see your screen.
Can you see my screen now? Or does
it is,
does it look like a PowerPoint?
Yes.
All right, so thanks for that introduction. So today I'll be giving a presentation with Charles from Synchron. I work at the UT Southwestern Medical Center in Dallas, Texas, and then other members of our team who are involved in the BCI research here include Dr. Jaya Trivedi, who is another neurologist in the MDA clinic, and Dr. Babu Welch, who is a neurosurgeon. He would be the one primarily responsible for the intraoperatively placing these devices in our patients. So a little bit about my background. My fellowship training is in neuromuscular medicine, same as most neuromuscular providers. I work in the UT Southwestern MDA multidisciplinary clinic. Now, a lot of you are probably familiar with the layout of multidisciplinary clinics. Ours is probably pretty similar. You see a physician, you see physical therapy, occupational therapy, equipment specialist, social worker, pretty much everybody that you need to help manage this disease. UT Southwestern is a large center for ALS care and research. We follow about 250 to 330 ALS patients at any given time. But what sets me a little bit apart from my neurology colleagues is that my residency training is in a specialty called physical medicine and rehabilitation. It's a specialty where we focus heavily on examining the patient holistically, focusing on what their needs are, and seeing if there's anything that can be done to provide functional benefits to them and to improve their quality of life as much as we can. My goal with this patient population has always been to try to bridge that gap between the neurological care, diagnosis, the research and the medical aspect of medicine, as well as providing that rehabilitation care doing some research into what kinds of optimal therapies, what kinds of devices, or what kinds of new technologies can be helpful for our patients. And that's kind of how I got involved with Synchron and with the BCI, or brain-computer interface technology. So what is BCI? As the name suggests, BCI is a system used to translate the electrical activity from your brain directly to an external device. In some way, shape, or form, there is electrodes that are in contact with the neurons coming from your brain. And there's three main types of BCI technologies. There's an external BCI, there's implantable, and then there's an endovascular approach, which we'll talk a little bit about today. There's been a fair amount of BCI research in able-bodied people, but right now there's a lot of focus on patients with neurological disease to see if this technology can provide any kind of practical benefit in terms of improving communication or improving function. And so the oldest type of BCI technology is an external array. Similar to what the name suggests, you wear this fancy helmet that has many different electrode arrays on it. It senses the electrical activity from your brain, similar to if you were ever to get an EEG. The benefits of this type of interface is that it's pretty non-invasive. Some of the limitations of this technology is that because there's several layers of tissue, skull, and skin between your brain and the electrodes, you don't get as much signal acquisition as one would like. And some of these devices may not be as portable as we would like. Where there's a lot of research right now is in an implantable type of BCI. What that is a small implantable microarray that they put right next to the motor cortex, the part of your brain that sends motor signals. It has been shown to have fairly good signal acquisition. One of the downsides is that this does require open brain surgery, even though the surgery is fairly minor and has a very low risk of complications. What we're going to talk a little bit more about today is a novel approach for brain-computer interface technology using an endovascular approach. The company that Charles works for, Synchron, they invented this technology. It's called a stentrode. It looks kind of like a cylindrical array, and it's similar to the technology that they use in stents to prevent strokes or to help strokes that are in the process of happening. It's helpful because it's minimally invasive. The stent is placed through one of your major blood vessels, and then it sits in the superior sagittal sinus right next to your brain. And the procedure is relatively safe, and the stent has been shown to stay in that spot, and it records the proper electrical signals from your brain. So going into a little bit more depth about how exactly BCI works, most forms of BCI technology rely on recording your motor output from the primary motor cortex. The way the system works in an able-bodied individual is, say I wanted to pick up a glass of water. It's not like I tell my hands to, move out 3 inches. It's not like I tell my fingers to move at a certain angle. Simply, I have this idea in my mind that I want to pick up this glass of water. We call that motor intent. And normally, motor intent starts in the primary motor cortex of the brain, travels down into the brainstem, and then the spinal cord, and then the peripheral nervous system. and then finally your nerves and your muscles. Various different types of neurological diseases impede the signal at various parts along this path. For example, a stroke would impede it at the level of the brainstem or the primary motor cortex. A spinal cord injury would impede it at the level of the spinal cord. In ALS, we know that the issue is at both the spinal cord, the anterior motor horn cells, as well as along the cortical spinal tract in the brain and the spinal cord itself. The idea of BCI technology is that you want to bypass these areas where the signal is not getting through. So you directly have electrodes that are right next to the primary motor cortex, and these record these motor signals from your brain, this motor intent, and tries to translate it into electrical signals, which can be helpful for functional tasks. So one of the questions that we get consistently is, if you get this type of interface, if you get this type of technology in your brain, can this thing read your mind? Can it secretly get your passwords or your bank codes? And the answer to that is no. It's not quite a technology that reads your mind. The interface is directly over the primary motor cortex. So the only thing that it's able to record is your motor signals or motor intent. How it works is that through rigorous training, you think of different motor gestures that you would normally do, such as, say, stepping down on the pedal. Your brain repeatedly performs the same brain signals each time you think of this motor signal. And then eventually the electrode array is able to pick that up. It recognizes that each time the signal is the same. And then we can program it so that eventually you can use it to control some kind of technology, whether that's typing on your phone or selecting between different options on your phone, and then possibly in the future, something more advanced than that. And so there's a fair amount of research of BCI in able-bodied patients, but currently there's a big emphasis on ALS patients and other patients with neurological diagnosis. ALS patients are a population of special interest because there's certain key factors which make them very good candidates for BCI research. One is that with continued dysfunction of the motor neurons, there's worsening weakness and paralysis and loss of communication. However, ALS patients are mostly neurocognitively intact. So the motor signals from the brain should be intact. It's just somewhere along the signal, either in the cortical spinal tracts or at the anterior horn cells, the signal is not getting through. Currently, BCI technology is still very new. A lot of the research is going into proof of concepts, showing that we can accurately record these signals and working on getting these signals towards practical things, such as being able to use some kind of technology, being able to communicate, being able to use your phone. Of course, this technology has a lot of possibilities. So in the future, I think if we're able to process and record these signals a little bit better, the hope is that one day people could use it to accurately control a wheelchair or other types of neuroprosthesis. And in my experience with ALS patients, I know that we focus a lot in our everyday clinic visits on the physical ADLs or activities of daily living. We do a lot in terms of assessing function, making sure people are plugged in with physical and occupational therapy, making sure you have the right adaptive equipment and power mobility devices. But I think something that does not get as much attention as it deserves is the communication aspect of it. And that's something that we're working really hard with Synchron to try to hopefully improve in this patient population. And you think of the things that are important for independence. More and more, I think we're reliant on technology and being able to use your phone, being able to use your electronic devices for things like communication, browsing the internet, accessing social media, managing your finances and medications. I think it's becoming clear that that is a form of independence as well. Like that is a form of functionality that we should also focus on. And just personally, in my experience with our ALS clinic, I think both communication and especially speed of communication is just so important when you're thinking about maintaining your personal relationships, being able to communicate effectively with your doctors, and then participating in some of these conversations that require you to be able to express these complex ideas that are not always easy by other methods. And so in summary, before I turn it over to Charles, BCI, I think it's very, very exciting technology. I think a lot of people see the potential of its applications in the future. I want to be realistic that the current research, is still a little bit proof of concept. We are working on establishing practical applications for being able to communicate and manage digital devices. The endovascular approach has been shown to be fairly safe, although it's been a small population of patients that have successfully received this. And it does require very significant training after device implantation, many, many hours, many, many weeks to process these different signals, have the computer learn what these different signals mean for you, and then try to implement that into some kind of device. And it does require, cognitively intact, very motivated patients with a fair amount of caregiver support. All right, and then with that, I will turn it over to Charles.
Thank you, Dr. Kai, as well as Sarah, Marissa, and the MDA for allowing us to present on some of these topics today. I'll also try to share my screen. Let me know if you're seeing that.
We can see it.
Perfect. Once again, my name's Charles Poeppelman. I represent Synchron here. I'm an SLP by background. I do have a financial disclosure in that I'm a full-time salaried employee of Synchron, but I've spent my career working for technology companies that really focus on delivering improved independence and autonomy, really the decision-making that patients with whether it be neurologic disease or other physical impairments encounter as a result of either an injury or a disease, which sort of brings us into a topic of BCI today. I think it's really helpful, at least for some of the talks I've given prior to this, is being very grounded in what it is that are the needs of the patients, really the needs or the problems we're looking to solve. So what we've been able to gather in our work with patients with ALS, but also kind of across different spectrums of paralysis or conditions that would cause paralysis, is that these three main columns or three main pillars that we're building this technology to be able to better serve patients. And we know that independence, being able to act for oneself, autonomy, that decision-making ability, and certainly privacy are impacted. When it comes to a disease like ALS, where paralysis is sort of at this rolling state of progression, independence, autonomy, and of course, privacy become impacted. So even with the augmentative use of assistive technologies, we know that there are gaps to be filled here. And I won't delve too far into the state of assistive technology. What you have there on the left-hand side of the screen is, of course, an eye tracker, and then on the right-hand side, a smart home speaker. So these sort of represent those external access technologies, assistive technologies that have really been invaluable for patients to be able to obtain and, of course, regain access or control over their environment, as well as, of course, over their communication functions. However, there is a core limitation here in that so long as an access method remains external, it will require caregiver intervention and continuous monitoring for like positioning, let's say, or mounting assistance for patients. BCI, not only Synchron, but the companies that are developing this technology are really looking at representing a different paradigm in which we're sort of looking to eliminate that constant reliance on external setups and that high amount of caregiver assistance that these technologies often need, as well as all the environmental restrictions that sometimes come with them, whether that be lighting conditions, whether that be sound conditions, or where a patient may be found in their home or in their environment. So this sort of so with all of that in mind, this is really what we're looking to deliver with a BCI in terms of independence, autonomy, and privacy. And that's delivering a system that's available immediately. We want it to work in the first session. What Dr. Kai had talked about is this high training environment in which patients with previous BCIs have really encountered. And even all the way up to today, BCI is not a new technology. It's been around for about 3 decades, actually, but there is yet to be a clinical indication. And a lot of that has to do with the training and reducing. And we think that with the emergence of what AI has been able to do, we think we can get training to a much more simpler, gamified sort of state for patients, but something we have to validate in clinical trials. So having it available for the session, work for the patient, the very first session, having it be an easy system to learn. Going back to what Dr. Kai presented about in terms of motor intent signals, if we think about a patient using an eye tracker, we don't typically control our environment. We don't typically communicate with people just with the use of our eyes. So you can think about having a lower cognitive burden using a motor pathway, such as pressing your gas pedal or squeezing your hand, that a patient has used their entire lives, and transitioning that to be a form of control for them. How that would decrease the cognitive load, perhaps, but again, have to validate that. And then number three, having it be always available. If we think about a minimal viable product that's a BCI, maybe it's a 24/7, always available call button for a caregiver alert that's available for a patient. So we think that there's clinical benefit to be shown there, but again, has to be validated. And 4 and 5 sort of go together here in terms of low calibration and stability of the signal. And this is something that, as your sample size grows, you can begin to continue to validate. But that low calibration, sticking there for a moment, if we think about not only eye tracking, but head tracking, any existing assistive technology that requires calibration of a patient's gaze or their connection to a computer or a vector on a screen, that's quite challenging in that what I've been able to see over the course of my career, as well as working with many different multidisciplinary teams, OTs, SLPs, PTs that work with patients with these technologies, is it sort of creates a bit of a test barrier, a testing environment, this pass-fail environment that patients often, if that's the only technology they have to maintain their social relationships or their control over their environment, that can be quite challenging dependent on lighting conditions, dependent on the caregivers that are assisting the patient when they're available, as well as things as simple as maybe what glasses they may be wearing or not wearing that day. So there's a lot that kind of goes into that. And Dr. Kai already had presented that, Synchron system is an endovascular approach. It's a minimally invasive approach. And I just want to show a small little infographic that kind of shows exactly how we go about doing that. So again, we're working within a vein here. So this isn't open brain surgery. We're putting essentially an electrode-based stent on top of the motor cortex, and it stays within the vessel. And then we're taking motor intention signals, that will to move out of the brain into what could be characterized as a subcutaneous that's underneath the skin, a pocket, very similar pocket that's created for pacemakers in cardiac care. So it sits under the clavicle, and the entire system then therefore is internalized. So there's no wires, there's nothing coming out of the skull, there's no open brain surgery. And graphically, this is what the system looks like. So you have that stentrode, that electrode array that sits above the motor cortex. We have a transceiver in the chest that sends raw brain data. There's no processing that's happening in the body out of the patient to then be processed and decoded into a specific output for a patient. So there you see in the middle there, if I can use a laser pointer, a signal processing unit that then decodes that signal and then makes it purposeful. So whether it elicits a click on an iPad screen or on a phone, or controls an environmental smart home device, let's say, whether it be a smart speaker or any amount of smart lights and bulbs and things throughout the patient's house. And really, functionally, what we're looking to impact here are those 9 domains, what we're calling digital activities of daily living. These are adapted from instrumental activities of daily living, the different tasks that a patient does to maintain their social relationships, but also their functional independence in their life. If we can contextualize this to like the ICF model, this is the International Classification of Functioning, Disability, and Health. You can think about I believe that the model states that true assistive technology adoption must consider environmental and personal factors. Okay, so if you can think about all the external technologies, eye tracking, hard switches, sip and puff switches, different forms of AT that patients use, they are fundamentally constrained by where they are mounted, who can assist them, and what environments they're available in. And so what we're looking to prove here and validate in clinical trial is that if you have a form of access that's with the patient all of the time, that could be beneficial in a variety of ways. So here we have some different demos by one of our patients that was involved in our last study, in which we're looking at improvement in terms of informational retrieval, smart environmental controls such as controlling a thermostat, shopping and entertainment, leisure tasks, but also communication and healthcare decision making. And what we've done is spurred quite a bit of chatter within those larger tech companies, and that we're looking to develop a system that can replace hand gestures, perhaps, because we know that the Apple Vision Pro works off of hand gestures. So if we can essentially model neural activity that's a hand gesture, we could have a patient control a Vision Pro. OpenAI and using generative AI to assist with that person-to-person communication interaction, so in person, and facilitating faster communication based on emotes and how a patient wants to elicit a message based on their emotional state, let's say. And then also with Amazon Alexa, being able to replace voice controls we think about Amazon Alexa and smart speakers and how much you can actually control of your environment just simply using your voice. So if we can replicate that with motor and sense signals, that's what we're looking to do. And I think even before jumping into this part, I'd like to share a small video of really what this kind of looks like in action, of a video that we did in collaboration with Apple's Vision Pro as well as with NVIDIA, which is a bit of a pioneer when it comes to artificial intelligence and using AI for good. So I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. Let me know if you can still hear, if you can hear this okay.
When I turn up, you get going. At every stop, baby, oh, it's showing. If I should stay, you find a reason to leave. When I'm busy, that's the time you are free. Just tell me, what should I do? How can I get, oh, how can I get through? How can I get through? Tell me, baby, please.
Cleaning started.
Can I get through to you?
Oh, Charles, you're muted.
Okay, so I'll stop sharing that. I'll jump back into the slides here briefly. I feel like it's helpful to incorporate a dog basically into just about any presentation that I do. Um, at any rate, just very briefly wanted to go over, again, Synchron, we're entering into our third clinical trial, in which we're going to be incorporating about 6 to 8 clinical sites across the country. We've already performed 2 clinical studies. Our first in human was actually in Australia. It involved 4 patients with motor neuron disease, 3 with ALS, 1 with PLS. And was primarily a safety study. So looking at the results of that, no serious adverse events or SAEs as they're reported in medical device clinical trials, no negative lifestyle changes, and the device was able to be used independently at home. Some of the efficacy that's proving clinical benefit of the system, early efficacy signs we were able to show is that patients were able to text, email, online shop, and bank using the system. And that's been published in JAMA Neurology as of 2023. Our command study, which was our first clinical study done here in the US under FDA investigation, was the first, our system was the first IDE awarded by the FDA. That's an investigational device exemption for a permanently implanted BCI in the United States. So excellent safety data. Again, no SAEs reported through 6 patients that were in our command study here in the US that involved 5 patients with ALS and 1 with brainstem stroke. And we were able to prove easy, accurate delivery of the stentrode. There are thousands of neural stents that are delivered in stroke care, as well as it's the same technology and care pathways used in, for instance, aneurysm treatment as well. So using microcatheters and small tools within the brain. Looking ahead, we've already conducted about 1,000 hours of market research. We've interviewed over 250 patients living with ALS, as well as caregivers, as well as managing physicians and therapists. And we've worked with a variety of organizations, now including the MDA. And we would encourage you that if you'd like to learn more about the technology or help us to develop, our absolute hope here is to develop the technology with patients with ALS, not for them. So we've built a clinical patient-based community, which is essentially a database. We're blinded from information specifically about patients, but to develop IRB-approved to deliver IRB-approved surveys, as well as to help inform patients about this technology. And with that, that's all I have today.
Great. Thank you both so much for sharing information about this amazing technology. I do have a couple questions to go over, if that's okay with you. And then whichever one of you feels comfortable answering the question, feel free to just hop on. First question is, what kind of training is required for a patient to effectively use a BCI system?
I'm happy to answer that. I think that it really depends. A lot of this is becoming, validated. It's validated through clinical studies. Every BCI system is a little bit different. You saw what Dr. Kai had presented. You have Utah arrays, which are, again, those microelectrodes that are put on, that are directly implanted into dura and subdura matter of the brain tissue. In past, there have been whole clinical teams, clinical research neuroscientists that have worked on patient training. we at Synchron don't think that model's going to work if the technology is going to scale. So we need to make the training much, much, much easier for patients. But that's a great question.
Great, thank you. Let me see here. We have another one. How customizable are these systems to individual patients' needs and progression of symptoms?
So with regard to like where a patient is in their disease progression, there's a lot of conversations that BCI companies like Synchron are having with like the FDA, for instance, and how wide the indication is going to be. Whether a patient is in their early stages of the disease, such as ALS, or if they're more late stage. A lot of we're being conversive with regulatory bodies to investigation bodies to figure out, where it's a similar. I've talked with a number of neurologists that work specifically with patients with ALS, and sometimes it may be a similar story to a PEG tube, and that maybe earlier on implant would be preferable based on safety profile of undergoing a surgery, but perhaps the clinical benefit may not be there immediately. So again, a lot of this needs to be validated in clinical study, but as far as making it patient specific, I think the functional aspect of what is a BCI going to do is very patient specific. What may be important for you, what functions you would like to do, it may be very different than the next patient. So that's also something that's, to try to validate those outcomes in a clinical study where each person may have something else they want to achieve can be challenging too. So that's why we're working with many different congresses, such as, the American Occupational Therapy Association, and we've attended the American Speech Language and Hearing Association. We've talked to a number of different sources to help us validate and figure out what those endpoints really need to be.
Great. Excuse me. How early would you need to get the stent implanted?
Yeah, and I think that goes right into what I had spoken about earlier in that, this is not yet commercially available technology, right? It's in clinical studies, and so we're validating when exactly a patient could get this system. So whether that be early on or late stage, we don't yet know. We're also thinking in terms of, the availability of the system to not being just one singular indication either. So if you look at, all the different types of diseases or injuries that could affect the motor neural pathway, I think it's going to be something we're all going to learn as it becomes available.
Absolutely. And then one final question, are there more opportunities to participate in the BCI trials?
Yes, absolutely. So that BCI community, which I'll share in the chat just after we finish here, I would encourage any patient, caregiver, healthcare provider that has an interest in this, or who has lived experience with disease, where we have to do, we do user acceptance testing. That's UAT work. That's product development for BCI. How is it going to serve you? How is it going to work with the current technology you use? And what functions are you looking to use a BCI, or would you like to use a BCI for? So that's very much in line with what our mission is to develop this technology with people with ALS, not just for them. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you, Dr. Kai and Charles, for everything you do for the community. Before you leave, if you'd like to insert any links into the chat, feel free to do so.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And again, so Synchron's been working very closely with UT Southwestern in Dallas, that representing North Texas. And again, looking at multiple trial sites into the future. But the North Texas UT Southwestern team, Dr. Kai, has been a terrific partner so far to work with. Thank you very much.
We look forward to hearing updates. Thank you.